Debbie Harry is an absolute icon in every single way. Trailblazer, a goddess, a queen. There's really nothing about her that, in my opinion, she's ever done wrong.
Deborah Harry, icon, actress, fashionista, sex symbol, revolutionary. All words that can be used to describe the lead singer of Blondie.
In terms of crossing from underground to mainstream culture, being an older woman in the music business and showing how elegant and strong and fantastic you can be. Everything about her is perfection. There was never one like her before, and the mold was broken after her.
Debbie and her impact on the industry is unparalleled. Blondie was a groundbreaking band, launching her into stardom and laid the groundwork for many rock, pop, and punk bands in the future. Though in the current year, they have fallen out of the spotlight, with over 40 million albums sold and having influenced many artists working today. It's hard to deny that Blondie has fully entrenched itself into pop culture, with some of their biggest hits still getting radio play to this day. This is the story of how Debbie Harry went from zero to hero in the world. She started from nothing and ended up becoming a star big enough to be compared to Marilyn Monroe. Debbie Harry was born as Angela Tremble on July 1st, 1945 in Miami, Florida.
Debbie Harry was actually adopted when she was 3 months old by her parents, Richard and Catherine. And when she was 4, she found out that she was adopted. So as a child, though, she recalled being a tomboy and hanging out in the woods and kind of having this quite healthy sounding childhood. She didn't meet her birth mother, though, until the 1980s. And when she did, she found out her birth mother was a concert pianist, which is interesting considering the trajectory that Harry's career went on. However, her mom did not want anything to do with her.
A lot of her childhood was shaped by the fact that she was adopted. She later wrote, "I guess somewhere in my subconscious, a scene was playing on a loop of a parent leaving me somewhere and never coming back." This went on to give her a deep passion for finding her place in the world and looking to make a mark on it. She explains in her memoir, Face It, "I was still trying to discover who I was, but I knew in high school that I wanted to be some kind of artist or bohemian." At an early age, she already incorporated herself into music, singing in her local church choir while growing up in Hawthorne, New Jersey.
And you have to kind of think in the 60s, being a tomboy, hanging out with other kids that are not girls and doing things that are not necessarily feminine, that's going to probably make her a little bit, not an outcast, but definitely on the perimeters of other kids her age that are female especially. It also would most likely set her up to be comfortable hanging out with all boys, all males, and understanding how guys work from a very, very young age.
She later graduated with an Associate of Arts degree, moving to New York City in the mid-60s. She had odd jobs, including a waitress and a secretary.
So before Debbie got into the music career, she was actually a Playboy bunny, and she did this from 1968 to 1973. And if you see pictures of her from that era, she does not have her trademark chopped off blonde bob. She actually has long brown, almost, dare I say, kind of a hippie vibe, wholesome looking hair. And I think it's very easy to think of Playboy bunnies as being put down by men. It's very misogynist and it's something that's demeaning to women. But of her time being a Playboy bunny at the Playboy Bunny clubs, she said it was very, very empowering. She said women ran the Playboy Bunny clubs. And if you think about it, it's really true. Women are getting money out of the men that are coming. Women are entertaining. Women are having to use their brains to engage with these clients, but they're also obviously using their looks as well. So it's kind of like the ultimate double dip power play for females in that environment, and that's really what she took away from it.
Debbie performed briefly in 1968 in the obscure psych folk band The Wind in the Willows, who only ever released one album. She provided backup vocals. While not being a massive act, this was an important stepping stone in igniting her love for creating music.
So the first band that Debbie Harry was a part of, she was actually a backup singer in a band called Wind in the Willows, which really could be nothing but a folk band with that title. This actually parlayed into her being into a group called the Stilettos with Chris Stein. And that's how they actually first met, was being in that together. And I think it just was not really the right vibe for them, and they both ended up leaving in 1974.
Despite the short tenure of The Wind in the Willow, her passion for music was firmly cemented as she began her journey to become lead singer in a band. In 1973, she joined the Stilettos, a stripped-back punk band, a massive departure from her previous folk roots. The group broke up after less than a year. However, this did lead her to meet Chris Stein, who became romantically involved with her.
Debbie Harry first met Chris Stein when he joined the Stilettos, and this is after she had left Wind in the Willows. And Stein joined the band as a guitar player. The two of them, I think, really saw in each other a great collaboration creatively, but also they became romantically involved. And that was a relationship that lasted for more than 2 decades. Through the huge worldwide success of Blondie, through both of them having drug problems, through Stein getting an autoimmune disease, which had badly affected his skin, the different financial problems the band had. And I think something that people don't necessarily talk about, but you can see it in their record covers, is also Blondie was for people. It was not Debbie Harry. Debbie Harry was not Blondie. And that could have really been an element that I think ultimately broke them up in the first place, but that must have put a lot of pressure on their relationship because the two of them were the nucleus, not just Debbie Harry. So they weathered all those storms together for many, many years as Blondie.
Chris Stein was born on January 5th, 1950, to Jewish parents in Brooklyn, New York. He wanted to be an archaeologist or historian growing up. However, that all changed when his parents bought him his first guitar, leading him on his journey as a musician, leading to tumultuous teenage years, and ultimately pushing him further into the world of music. During this time period of her life, she experienced some incredibly traumatizing things. Before meeting Chris, Deborah dated a man who went on to threaten at gunpoint to rape her, accusing her of cheating. When living with Chris Stein, the two habited a cheap and seedy apartment in New York due to their lack of money. Speaking on the apartment, Chris said, "Debbie and I lived on the Bowery. We had a few cockroaches and a poltergeist. There was knocking in the walls and pictures would fall. One day, the apartment was burgled, the attacker holding them at knife point. He tied them up before ransacking the place. The man then proceeded to rape Debbie while Chris was still tied up. Debbie has also claimed to have narrowly avoided being killed during this time. She said that one night, she was trying to get a taxi home in the East Side part of New York when a man pulled up in a white car offering her a ride home. She eventually decided to take the man up on his offer. However, he didn't talk to her at all in the car, and she noticed there was no door handle or window crank. The inside of the car had been totally stripped down. She got very nervous as the man began to drive faster, swerving the car around the corner as she was launched out of the door and into the street as the man sped away. She never reported this to the police and moved on with her life. However, 15 years later, she saw the man's face on a magazine cover. He had been arrested. It was the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. However, some people have criticized this story as at the time, Bundy was said to be active in Florida. Debbie, however, has always maintained that it is a true story.
I think regardless if it's true or not, it's a great story, so I don't really care if it's true or not.
After the Stilettos split up, Chris and Debbie decided to form their own band with the drummer and bassist, Clem Burke and Gary Valentine, respectively. Originally, they were going to be called Angel and the Snake. However, they changed it a few months later to the name we all know today, Blondie.
So when Chris Stein and Debbie Harry decided to start a band, they originally were billed as Angel and the Snake, and this only lasted for about 2 shows. The name they felt didn't 100% suit them, and they also were going through different bass players and drummers, and they actually finally settled on the name Blondie, and this was after repeatedly Debbie Harry had been called out on the street by passing cars, "Hey, Blondie," out the window. So that by that time she'd cut the hair, and that had become part of the whole persona of her stage look, and definitely, I would even say, the kind of icy part of their performance style. The final Blondie lineup, though, got cemented when Clem Burke joined the band on drums and Gary Lackman joined the band on bass.
The name came from the catcalling she would get from men on the streets, with Debbie recognizing it as easy to remember, simple, and most importantly, taking a degrading name and owning it. Blondie began their burgeoning career, playing in clubs in New York. They had a gritty, streetwise appeal that made them popular among the punk scene of the day. They enjoyed a modest success quickly. However, the band had added and changed a few members already, with the drummer and bassist, Clem Burke and Gary Valentine, respectively joining the band, with Valentine replacing Fred Smith, who later went on to join the band Television. By the end of 1975, Jimmy Destry was added on keyboards. The band established themselves at the clubs Max's Kansas City and the renowned CBGB, which together were the heart of New York's progressive arts community and frequented by the likes of Andy Warhol's Factory Contingent. Like many of the artists in these venues, Blondie felt unconstrained by convention and were exploring new approaches to rock music, stripping it down to a bare, raw, and urgent form. Blondie, aesthetically, took inspiration from the 1960s fashion and pop style, further setting them apart from their contemporaries. Debbie Harry was a femme fatale, sexy, smart, and dangerous, and a rare female lead in the punk clubs. After sounding innocent and sweet during a song like "In the Flesh," she could come back at you with a vicious snarl in "Rip Her to Shreds." The fact that she was drop-dead gorgeous was an enhancing element to the band's musical package, though a constant challenge to their identity. Eventually, Harry and the band got noticed when in June of 1975, Alan Betrock, a regular at the renowned CGBG Club, well known for its punk atmosphere and helping to push breakout artists into the mainstream, heard Blondie play and decided to help them produce a demo. Blondie had their chance to record for the first time. Their first single was Ex-Offender.
Blondie made their debut self-titled album, Blondie, in 1977 for the independent label Private Stock. And they were not pleased, really, with the way that the record performed. The first track was a song called Dennis, which if you see the video for it, you're like, oh yeah, I know that song. But it didn't really have the breakthrough and appeal and impact I think that the band was hoping for. So they ended up buying back the rights to that self-titled debut and signing to Chrysalis later that year.
In June 1976, Blondie released their first self-titled album. The band was a pioneer in the early American new wave and punk scenes of the mid to late 1970s. Its first 2 albums contained strong elements of both genres, and although successful in the United Kingdom and Australia, Blondie was regarded as an underground band in the United States until the release of Parallel Lines in 1978. They enjoyed modest success for a time, releasing 2 albums as Harry continued to hone her performing style with each release. She knew how to utilize her beauty and sexuality with a compelling combination of humor and ironic detachment, as she delivered songs that were often written by her male bandmates from their testosterone-y perspective, making them favorites of the LGBTQ community from their earliest days. They represented a kind of gender fluidity and acceptance rare for that era.
It's easy now to look back and go, oh, like Debbie Harry was super beautiful. That's why she was who she is. But the thing is, it has never been easy for women to break into the music scene. Maybe as a straight up pop star that's a little bit manufactured, but rock and roll, punk rock, even hip hop, these genres are male dominated. Males work at the record labels, they work at the press. They're the ones, I mean, how many women even today are said, you know what, you can go play an instrument or you can do something. Like, it's very, very difficult. And you can kind of count on your fingers. I've tried to do it before. Who are kind of iconic women from, before 2000. And you really kind of come up with maybe 5 or 6 at a push. And I think the thing is that it was just hard. It was such a man's world. And like, women were always on the outside of that. They were always the groupies. They were in the audience. They would come with their boyfriends to the show. And I don't really know 100% why that is. I think part of it is culturally, women never saw themselves in those places or playing instruments or fronting a band. And so therefore, if you don't see it, you don't even think it's a possibility. And that is, I think, one huge reason that there weren't many women around then. And there are more women around now, if we look at it like that. Debbie Harry herself really walked this line of pretty much nobody else I know, of being gritty and dirty and tomboyish in the way she dressed and looked, but still being sexy. Like, she never has the boobs out. She never is like overtly sexualized, but that is what makes her so appealing. And so as a woman, it's that quintessential, I want to be her. I mean, even now, I want to be Debbie Harry desperately. Any era, I'll take it. And as a man, you want to be with a woman like that. You want to be with a woman that can wear jeans, that can hang out with the guys, but still be cool and sexy. And again, I think this is one of the things that has been universally appealing about her, but why she has maintained a fan base is because there's not many people, period, that can do that, and she does it so perfectly. As a woman that works in the music industry, you look at her and go, here's someone that is obviously, the first thing people say about Debbie Harry always is how beautiful she is, but they don't talk about her songwriting, and they don't talk about her living a very public life in terms of her relationship, in terms of creativity and the judgment that must go into being that figure. And I think as a young artist looking at her, you can be like, I can be something like that. I can lead a band of men. I can be a songwriter. I can be a fashion icon without it all being about the way I look or the fact that I have a vagina. She really carved a way for that. And I think the reason she's still such an icon is because she still is someone we look up to. There's not many people now that are doing that in that same way. And especially, I would say, since the internet started, there's not going to be people that have that same kind of staying power. We're living in a very disposable culture moment. So are there going to be other people that at 70, like, are there, like, is, the girl that sings Call Me Maybe, 30 years from now, are we going to be looking at her and go, ooh, an icon? No, we won't even remember these people's name. Debbie Harry is part of a culture and a moment that happened, but it has created the culture that exists now. So that's one reason she's still so relevant. It's easy to say, oh, well, Debbie Harry, Blondie, Chris Stein, that whole sound was new wave, post-punk, punk, but that's way too simplistic. I think the crucial thing about this band is that Debbie Harry and Chris Stein in particular really moved around the New York culture that they were living in. They weren't above, or I should say closed off from experiencing different sounds, different cultures, different people than those they'd grown up in, or grew up around. And that really comes to fruition in the first instance in Parallel Lines, because you can hear the rap, you can hear the reggae, you can hear the disco, that Studio 54, but then you still have that very icy, edgy, gritty almost, even though the production value is so high quality, of punk rock coming into it. So it isn't like they're hearing these other elements and saying, we're going to copy that. It literally is like they're taking a bit of this and a bit of that and making something totally new. And I think few, if any, other bands have been able to do that as successfully as Blondie since then. They really kind of created a genreless genre. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many people love them, because there's something there for everybody. And if your way in is through Heart of Glass, which is so disco, if your way in is through Dreaming, whatever it is, if it's like a song like Dreaming is very much a message song. It's a lyric driven song. But something like Heart of Glass is very much just like, dun, 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 dun. So you may not think you would like anything that's as punky as Dreaming, but your entryway drug, if you would be Heart of Glass.
Blondie enjoyed bending genres and melding them together, which is why it's difficult to strictly tie the band down to one music genre. However, it wasn't until 1978 that they began to ascend from popular underground act into mainstream stars with the release of their 1978 album Parallel Lines, which became, and still remains, a definitive and seminal piece of new wave music. The tracks One Way or Another and Heart of Glass has become two of the band's signature songs. The latter ranking number 255 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time, and with its 1.3 million sales in UK only, Heart of Glass made Blondie one of the zeitgeist bands of the 70s.
If I had to put Blondie into a category, I think I'd say they're punk rock. And here's why. Because the idea at the very base of punk rock is that anything goes, and you can just literally throw away anything and everything that you thought something was. So punk rock is about an attitude. That's the most founding part of punk. And that's exactly what Blondie does. In terms of Debbie Harry as the front person, in terms of the sound, the fashion, everything about them it goes by something totally different than what came before.
The song is one of the UK's greatest-selling singles of all time and was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame for its historical significance in 2015. After the success of Parallel Line, the group blew up in popularity. Their mainstream success continued with the group's next albums, Eat to the Beat, in 1979, which included Dreaming and Atomic, another one of the group's most well-known songs. Although the band's popularity skyrocketed after they adopted a more polished sound, many accused them of selling out by embracing trendy dance music. But that was exactly the point. For me, it was about dancing. I loved going to clubs. Harry told the New York Times in August 2022. Interestingly, it was Blondie that produced the first rap song to hit radio airwaves. With their love of mixing genres taking center stage yet again, their single, Rapture. Auto-American was released in 1980, the band's fifth studio album, which featured two more #1 hits, the reggae mariachi-influenced The Tide is High and the aforementioned Rapture. The band had also landed another #1 later in the year with their rock single, Call Me, a collaboration with producer-songwriter Giorgio Moroder that was featured on the soundtrack for American Gigolo. Debbie became well known for her fashion, like a true fashionista, She wore whatever she really felt like, not caring what anyone else thought, and she never tried to fit in or look like anyone else. Her clothing sense, along with her beauty and uncaring attitude, led to many eyes being on her. During this time, Debbie became friends with one of the most famous artists of all time, Andy Warhol. The two became good friends, and Debbie has even been immortalized by Warhol, with the artist creating a small series of 4 canvas portraits of the star in different colors, as well as Polaroids and a small number of rare silver gelatine prints from the shoot taken in Warhol's famous Factory.
New York in the 70s was downtrodden, dirty, lots of graffiti everywhere. You had white flight, so like a lot of white people lived in the suburbs, a lot of African Americans and Latinos had moved into the downtown area. It was a lot cheaper. It was so cheap that artists could actually afford to live there. And that itself is like a shocking idea, because New York, I think, it has that reputation of being somewhere where creative ideas and people that are on the perimeters and outsiders can blossom and bloom, but that really comes from this specific moment in time. And a huge instigator of that were really kind of 2 places. You have CBGB's, which is this little tiny punk club, and you have Andy Warhol's Factory. Now, both of these entities have grown to be bigger and more important as time has passed, and we've seen what's come out of them that maybe they actually were at that moment. But the reason that's so fascinating is because as the time was, they were just automatically and authentically, I should say, attracting people that wanted to engage with the avant-garde, that wanted to think differently, that wanted to be around ideas and creatives that challenged them. And Andy Warhol's Factory, it was a place for outsiders to suddenly be insiders. And that was something that Debbie Harry and Chris Stein were very, very drawn to. And I think in Andy Warhol, Debbie Harry saw a mentor in some ways, but I also know that Andy Warhol saw a muse in Harry. Around this whole time, you have Warhol starting to have other collaborations and creative inspiration. One is a partnership that he forges with a young black guy named Jean-Michel Basquiat. And Basquiat was a graffiti artist in New York. He'd become infamous for the tag Samo. And he started doing large paintings. He actually approached Warhol at one point, and the 2 of them started doing work together. And this, again, Blondie, Debbie Harry, Chris Stein, they're not immune to this. They see this and it's osmosis. They're taking this on. They're starting to engage with this. Through Warhol, I think in a lot of ways, is the conduit for some of the sounds that they start experimenting with. And this comes to real full fruition on Auto-American, the record that comes out in 1979. And you have to see like how quick these albums are coming out. So you have to think about the changing music circles and genres and creativity that's going on in New York at that moment, and the way that film, music, and fashion are all kind of creating this huge wave of culture and vary the speed of what that's happening at. And so they actually take this emerging hip hop sound and culture and put it into their song Rapture, which goes on to be the first #1 hip hop song with the rap in the middle that Debbie Harry does. And she's calling out hip hop culture in the song. She's talking about Fab Five Freddy. He was a famous graffiti artist. Jean-Michel Basquiat actually is in the video doing graffiti. So you have these elements of I would say black culture, even further underground than punk culture, that are emerging and put on display in this Blondie video. And what that does, it not only brings hip hop and rap and that underground culture to the mainstream, it also positions Blondie as the pioneers, or if you would, being in touch with the newest, coolest thing. So it does 2 things at one time.
Harry said of her relationship with Warhol, "I think the best thing Andy Warhol taught me was always to be open to new things, new music, new style, new bands, new technology, and just go with it. Never get mired in the past, and always accept new things whatever age you are." Blondie, now 5 albums into their 4-year recording history, were straining at the seams, despite being at their peak success. now with 3 consecutive hit albums and 4 #1 songs. Disputes over musical direction and the media attention on Debbie were leading to strained relationships.
So the band took a short hiatus in 1981. Debbie Harry had put out her first solo record, Cuckoo, so she wanted to focus a little bit on that. I think they were a little bit burned out from just literally pumping out these records one after another in pretty quick succession. And drugs had plagued the band members, different stages of addiction throughout their career. So I think by the time 1981 rolled around, they just needed a break from each other and from that kind of scrutiny and the paparazzi spotlight.
The band at this time were also heavy drug users, which was another big factor in their relationship straining. In her memoir, Face It, she revealed she used heroin to blank out parts of my life, or when she was dealing with some depression. The band were also offered a chance to make the theme song for the next James Bond movie, For Your Eyes Only. However, it was rejected in favor of a song by Bill Conti. Their version of the song did, however, appear in their next album, The Hunter.
Blondie was going to be contributing a song to the James Bond soundtrack, For Your Eyes Only. And again, this is a kind of a tension-filled time because Harry had gone solo and things were not totally copacetic with the band. And to make matters worse, Sheena Easton came and stole the song out from under them, and the movie's people decided to go with Sheena Easton instead of Blondie for the title track. So that was a big blow to them, and I think that kind of really was the hammer that really sealed the coffin on the downward trajectory that they were heading on at that moment. And this wasn't helped by their 6th studio album, The Hunter. Everything about that record is like, huh? Like the cover itself, you have the boys standing behind Debbie Harry, and she has her hair ratted out like a lion. And just, you pick it up and it's confusion right there. What is this that's going on? And the sounds from it were, it didn't have that same mix of genres as past Blondie records had. It was much more convoluted, and it just sounded like a band that didn't really care anymore. So after that, the band actually broke up, and it was stated there was financial problems. You could see that there were issues with that record connecting with audiences because a tour that they had booked was not selling very well. And I think the band also was really irritated at this point with all the attention going to Debbie Harry, that Blondie was a band, not one person. So that all ultimately ended in them breaking up. Around the same time, the drug addiction problems with Chris Stein really escalated, and he found out that he had an autoimmune disease. So it kind of was good timing to take a break in terms of Debbie Harry was able to really help nurse him back to health, and the two of them had the chance to reconnect as a couple, but also in a healthy way. So I think just the strain of being on the road and the constant attention for almost a decade had just finally taken its toll on both of them.
The Hunter, while possibly better in retrospect, lacked anything close to cohesion, and the album flopped. While they continued to experiment in music, this album proved to be rough. This, combined with drug issues, tension with the band, bad live performances on TV, and more, led to the band becoming more and more strained. Ultimately, Blondie broke up after the release of The Hunter. Coincidentally, around this time, Stein was diagnosed with pemphigus, an autoimmune disease that affects the skin and could be fatal if not treated. This development, combined with the general unhappiness in the band, led to them calling it quits, announcing their breakup in November of 1982. Harry took time out from her career to look after him. He recovered, and although their relationship didn't survive, as the two broke up in 1989, the two have remained good friends. Harry later revealed that she has also been romantically involved with women, confirming her bisexuality, though her longer-term relationships were with men. The singer has proudly spoken about desire and intimacy throughout her life, via interviews and her work. The breakup of Blondie led to Debbie leading a solo career, not just in music, but in acting too, with her biggest role as being her starring one in the David Cronenberg body horror flick Videodrome, as well as in John Waters' Hairspray. Musically, Debbie had already dipped her toes in a solo career. Made in 1981 during the small break that Blondie took before The Hunter, the album was a moderate success, showcasing fusions of funk, rock, and dance music. However, after a long break of looking after Chris Stein, Debbie returned with Rockbird in 1986, a rock-centric solo outing, which also came as a moderate success, but showed her willingness to continue to evolve and grow musically. In 1989, Harry released her third solo studio album, Deaf, Dumb, and Blonde. The album was not a commercial success. However, musically, it was reminiscent of Blondie, purposely so, hinting at potential reunion, leading to her 1993 album Deprivation, which received middling review from critics.
Debbie Harry continued to pursue a solo career. She went by Deborah Harry. So this record was different. It was called Rockbird. It came out in 1985. She went into almost like a torch song, lounge kind of vibe with things. So again, you could say a complete departure from punk rock, or you could say it's just another evolution of punk rock. I think it's very, very difficult to be an artist because people love you and become a fan of yours for one specific sound or maybe a moment in time or a record. And then they want you to both put out stuff that sounds like that, what you like, but they also want to be different enough so it's not exactly the same. So in some ways, I think Blondie really got chastised for that, for going so far away from where they were in the beginning. But at the same time, I think that they need to be celebrated for being brave. They could have just kept putting out parallel lines over and over again. That just wasn't who they were as artists or creatives. So, you look at some of the best artists, they change over time. And that's, I think, really important to appreciate about a group like Blondie. I always hoped that Blondie would make a comeback because as like a young adult, they weren't an entity that was touring around. I actually saw their comeback tour. And I remember what was really kind of strange about it is we have that image of Debbie Harry as the parallel lines Debbie Harry. So is this so grooved into my brain? I remember I was surprised when she came up on the stage and she had like sweatpants and a butt bag. And when she came up on to the mic, she had a mouthful of rose petals, which she spit out. And I was like, whoa, what's happening with that? I was kind of taken aback. But now that I've had time to kind of process and think about it, I'm like, she's Debbie Harry. She can wear whatever she wants. And I think it was a kind of two fingers up to the whole pin-up sex symbol image that she'd had. She was like, this is who I am, and this is it. And that, again, references back to that original punk rock ethos of just being yourself and ripping up the rule book.
In the 1990s, Blondie began receiving more praise again from a whole new generation of fans, including fellow bands like Garbage and No Doubt. As Debbie continued her moderately successful solo career, she reunited with Stein and Burke for a summer tour as part of a package with other bands in 1990. This reignited the band for a possible reformation, but it didn't happen just yet. In 1996, Stein and Harry began the process of reuniting Blondie and contacted original members, Burke, Destry, and Valentine. Valentine had by this time moved to London and become a full-time writer under his real name, Gary Lockman. Former members Nigel Harrison and Infante did not participate in the reunion, and they unsuccessfully sued to prevent the reunion under the name Blondie. In 1997, the original five-piece band reformed, including Valentine on bass, and did 3 live performances, all at outdoor festivals sponsored by local radio stations. Their first reunion performance occurred on May 31st, 1997, when they played the H.F. Stevel at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. An international tour followed in late 1998 and early 1999. During this period, and without Valentine, they released a cover of Iggy Pop's song Ordinary Bummer on the tribute album We Will Fall, the Iggy Pop Tribute, 1997, under the pseudonym Adolph's Dog.
Blondie brings in Jimmy Destry as a keyboard player, and that changes the sound and the direction of their music in a lot of ways. after their reformation. And I think it's one of those things, again, that they kind of can't win if they start going in a totally different direction than what people know. Because by this time, people had had that greatest hits record. They've been listening to those songs over and over again. Those songs are 2 decades old at this point. So I think whatever they did, they would be both universally embraced and universally panned. So I think it's impossible to recreate a hit like Parallel Lines because it was so of its time. I think the fact that they're trying to change and evolve and keep their minds open over all these years shows something that's both very brave and definitely positions them forever as innovators.
In February of 1999, the band finally released a new studio album, No Exit, Blondie's first album in 17 years.
I think you definitely could hear a different sound with the reformed Blondie. It had, when you say new wave, when I think new wave, I think synthesizers and electronic sounds, and that was definitely incorporated into the record and into No Exit. And I think it's the title track, No Exit. It almost doesn't sound like a weird thing to say. It sounds like they're going through a tunnel. There's a lot more effects on it than past Blondie records had. And the track Maria, which went on to be a huge, huge hit, that I think sounded almost like an amalgamation of, in some ways, I think Dreaming, that poppiness of Dreaming, the immediacy of Dreaming, but it also had kind of that in the flesh, the kind of like the chimes that are in the background. You could definitely hear definitely an homage to past Blondie songs in that hit. And I think it's one of the reasons that it struck a nerve with so many people. Of course, something that's hugely groundbreaking about the success of Maria is the fact that exactly 20 years it comes after their first chart topper, Heart of Glass. And outside of Michael Jackson, they're the only other artist to ever have number ones in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. So it's absolutely incredible.
The album was a success, despite middling reviews from critics, reaching number 3 in the UK albums chart and being certified gold. Fusing alt-rock, pop, reggae, country, and more, it was truly Blondie at their most experimental. Their single, Maria, became Blondie's 6th number 1. This gave the band the distinction of being one of only 2 American acts to reach number 1 in the UK singles charts in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. The band later released The Curse of Blondie in 2003, their 8th studio album. Unabashedly embracing dance music, the fans, however, did not embrace this change. Unfortunately, the album's title proved true, and the move to a purer dance sound cursed them to mixed results, with fans not embracing the new direction. The Curse of Blondie was the lowest charting album since their debut LP and relegated the band out of the spotlight within current music. Perhaps No Exit had succeeded due to the novelty of the reunion, but now it appeared Blondie was yesterday's news, left to touring casinos and other smaller venues that catered to artists of yesteryear. Even though not many older artists were still producing new, good music as regularly as Blondie.
The progression style over the years, definitely you can see the thing that's the same is they're a band of their time. So if we look back at that very, very early 70s when Harry joins Wind in the Willows, the name, the sound, the look with the brown hair, everything about it was of that moment. And then if we look at that time when they're starting to really be involved with the factory and the different scenes that are happening in New York, that captures that moment. And again, when Maria comes out as a single off No Exit, even that, the title of that record, No Exit, there is no exit from being Blondie, is there? That in and of itself, it's of a moment. And that record, of course, comes out right before the internet and streaming and the kind of music framework. And the sound may have changed, but who they are at the core has stayed the same in terms of reflecting like a mirror the culture of what's going on around them.
In 2011, the band released a new album, their first new material in 8 years since The Curse of Blondie, and just 3 years later, a double album called Blondie 4-0 Ever was released. Both albums did relatively well, both commercially and in reviews, proving the band still had life in them. In 2017, Blondie would release their 11th studio album, Pollinator, an alternative electronic rock outing, which was a great success in the UK, peaking at number 4 in the charts, their highest UK chart peak in 18 years. In 2019, Blondie were invited to perform in Havana, Cuba, as part of a cultural exchange through the Cuban Ministry of Culture. This experience was documented by director Rob Roth in the short film Blondie, Vivir en La Habana, which featured 60mm, 8mm film and digital footage from the shows and the band members around Havana and interviews. Guitarist Chris Stein couldn't travel, but is present in footage shot in New York. The film is divided into 3 segments: water, fire, and air, which present a meditation on the experience, as well as highlights from the 2-night live musical performances with special guests, Alain Perez, David Torrens, and Afro-Cuban rock band Synthesis at Havana's Teatro Mela. The film made several appearances in film festivals, receiving good responses from critics and audiences.
I don't think it's fair to compare sales or the way that a single performs now to something even 10 years ago, because so much now of what is pushing pop music, when I say pop music, hip hop, rock, whatever it is, it's not just the streams, it's not just the record sale, it's also the merchandise, the sponsorship, the what is your social media following, there's all these other things. Before, when Blondie were coming up, it was about, like, your music was the wheel, and anything that came off of that was just extra. Now the wheel is Blondie, and the different spokes, it could be video, streaming, touring, merchandise, live streaming now that we're in this strange new world. It could be perfume. So music is just one component. So you can't really compare the sales story. I think a better way to compare it is, can you go into Primark or H&M and buy a Blondie shirt? If they're that mainstream, then they've crossed over into something that's much bigger than themselves.
Throughout her career, Debbie has pushed the boundaries of music, experimenting both in her solo career and in Blondie. Blondie has firmly cemented itself in the Hall of Fame of musicians, with over 40 million records sold worldwide and an esteemed legacy. Penning some of the greatest and most well-known songs of all time and inspiring countless musicians today. While their time in the limelight may have came and gone, Debbie, now in her mid-70s, is still performing, thrilling audiences while remaining just as witty and perpetually relevant as ever. An impressive triumph for a small-town girl with big city dreams. From downtrodden and poor to worldwide superstar, Debbie Harry has come a long way in her journey, and with the band still alive and well, who knows what's next?
The legacy of Blondie will definitely be of what a woman can be. I think it's, even if the band doesn't like it, I can understand why they don't. You see that a lot with situations like that, where there's one very prominent person, especially if it's a woman. But I think the biggest legacy will to show what a woman can be. A woman can be sexy and a tomboy and an innovator and the ruler of a band of boys, all those things, and not have to depend on her sexuality to be that. I think Debbie Harry as an icon is really the biggest legacy. One thing the whole band will be remembered for, though, is to show how a rock and roll group and songwriters can definitely put a mirror up to what's happening in society at any time and give it back to them. And I think that's something that popular music is missing a lot now.